Samantha had always been one to keep to herself. As a janitor at the upscale Regent Tower Hotel, she was just another face in the crowd, a silent worker who cleaned after the rich and famous, never crossing their paths or catching their attention. Her job was simple, routine: mop the floors, dust the surfaces, and leave before anyone even noticed she had been there. But little did she know that on this particular morning, her life was about to change forever. The air was thick with the scent of fresh bleach as Samantha moved through the lavish hotel suite. She wiped the marble countertops, her hands steady but her mind elsewhere. The perfume lingering in the air spoke of wealth, of a lifestyle far beyond her reach: rich, expensive, and careless. She had been working at the Regent for a little over a year now, cleaning rooms belonging to people who barely acknowledged her existence. They walked past her as though she were invisible, nothing more than a part of the background. The polished wood floors, the glimmering chandeliers, the expensive rugs, all of it just there. She was part of the scenery, no more important than the furniture. That morning started just like any other. Samantha entered the penthouse suite of Christopher Grant, the well-known entrepreneur and millionaire. He was always in and out of the hotel, surrounded by assistants and colleagues, never spending more than a few minutes in his room. She didn't even have a clear image of what he looked like up close, but she was familiar with the whirlwind that followed him everywhere. She had learned over time to move quickly, dusting and vacuuming the suite with the utmost precision, making sure to leave before anyone even noticed her presence. But today was different. As Samantha cleaned the coffee table, a sharp noise from the adjoining room caught her attention. The voices, though muffled, echoed from the wall. It wasn't unusual for her to overhear guest conversations, but something about this particular conversation felt wrong. She hesitated, rag in hand, her heart racing. Leaning closer to the door, she could clearly hear a woman's voice, one she recognized from passing by the hotel lobby. Elizabeth Grant, Christopher's wife. Samantha had seen her on numerous occasions, always walking beside him, her laughter echoing in the hallways. But today, Elizabeth's voice was far from warm and loving. "We need to make sure this trip is the last one he ever takes," the woman whispered, her words thick with malice. Samantha froze. A chill ran down her spine. Her heart hammered in her chest as the voice of a man responded, cold and emotionless. "Don't worry. It will happen. Just make sure he's on that plane." The blood drained from Samantha's face. She wasn't just overhearing a trivial conversation. She was hearing something far more sinister. A plan, a plot, to kill Christopher Grant. The thought gripped her stomach in a vice-like hold. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe, as she listened to their voices carry on, planning his murder during an upcoming business trip. Samantha's first instinct was to flee, to run back to her cleaning cart, pretend she had heard nothing, and continue with her day. But something stopped her. She had already heard too much, and now she was involved, whether she liked it or not. She backed away from the door, her hands trembling as she tried to steady her breath. The thought of calling the police crossed her mind, but what could she possibly say? She was just a janitor, a lowly employee. Would anyone take her seriously? She leaned against the wall, trying to calm herself, but the weight of what she had just heard crushed her. She had no idea what to do, where to turn. All she could think of was how to survive, how to get out of this without becoming a target herself. The people in that room, Elizabeth and her accomplice, clearly had no qualms about murder. They could easily turn their attention to someone like Samantha, a nameless face with no power. But even so, Samantha knew one thing. She couldn't just let this happen. What if it were her own family in danger? What if she had the chance to stop it? As the minutes passed, Samantha stood frozen in the silence of the penthouse, the sounds of the hotel echoing faintly around her. She had heard enough to know the truth. Someone's life was in danger, and if she didn't act, she might be responsible for letting it happen. Her mind raced as she quickly finished cleaning the suite, the routine motions no longer soothing. She had to warn Christopher Grant, but how could she approach him without sounding insane? How could she get him to believe her, just a maid, about something so outrageous? Samantha couldn't bring herself to do nothing. The weight of the responsibility hung over her, and despite her fear, she knew she couldn't let this go. By the time she left the penthouse, Samantha had made up her mind. She would find a way to warn Christopher. She didn't know how or when, but she couldn't let him go on that trip. She couldn't let him die. That night, as she sat in the employee lounge, Samantha replayed the conversation in her mind over and over again. The voices, the threat, the certainty in Elizabeth's words, it was all real. But as she sat there, an overwhelming wave of doubt crept over her. What if she had misinterpreted what she had heard? What if she was making a mistake? The fear that she had somehow misunderstood the situation gnawed at her, but she knew deep down that what she had overheard was no coincidence. Samantha knew that if she went directly to Christopher, he might not believe her. Or worse, if she went to the police, they would dismiss her as a paranoid janitor with no proof. She had to be careful. She had to be smart. The next day, when Christopher Grant entered the hotel lobby, surrounded by his usual entourage of assistants, Samantha spotted him across the room. Her heart raced, and she knew this was her moment. She couldn't let it slip away. Taking a deep breath, she walked toward him, her palms sweaty as she rehearsed what she would say. She only had one shot at this. "Mr. Grant," Samantha called out, surprising even herself. He looked up at her, his eyes narrowing as he took her in. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice shaky but determined. "About your trip. You shouldn't go. Something's not right." Christopher raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. He glanced at her name tag, his expression unreadable. "And why should I trust you?" Samantha swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. But she knew one thing for certain. Whether he believed her or not, she had done all she could. She had warned him. "I can't explain everything," she whispered, stepping closer. "Just trust me on this. Don't go on that trip." For a moment, Samantha saw something flicker in Christopher's eyes. Was it doubt? Was it curiosity? She couldn't tell. He straightened up, his posture stiffening. "I'll think about it," he said curtly, his voice dismissive. And just like that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Samantha stood there, heart pounding, feeling both relieved and defeated. She had done what she could. The rest was up to him. As the day went on, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had done the right thing. She had warned him. Now, all she could do was hope he would take her advice seriously. The weight of the situation, of the danger looming over Christopher's head, pressed heavily on her shoulders. She had spoken the truth, and now it was out her hands. The only thing she could do now was wait and hope that her warning had made a difference. The day after Samantha's warning to Christopher Grant passed with a tense, anxious silence. She spent most of her shift thinking about her brief encounter with him, her mind replaying the look of doubt in his eyes. She had expected more, maybe a thank you, or at least an acknowledgement that he'd take her seriously. But instead, all she had received was a vague promise to think about it. Still, Samantha couldn't help but feel a faint hope lingering in her chest. She had warned him, done what she could to stop the worst from happening. But now the weight was unbearable. What if he didn't believe her? What if he brushed her off as just another hotel staff member who had no business interfering in his world? That night, after finishing her cleaning duties, Samantha sat in her small apartment, staring at the walls that seemed to close in on her. The silence was deafening. She kept thinking about what she had overheard. Elizabeth's voice dripping with malice, the cold, calculating tone of the man who was part of the conspiracy. Every detail, every word, replayed in her mind like a broken record. There was no way she could forget it. She picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts, considering whether or not to call the police. But what good would it do? She had no concrete evidence, no recordings of the conversation, just her word. A janitor's word against the richest family in the city. She couldn't even imagine how quickly that would be dismissed. Her phone buzzed, breaking her thoughts. It was a message from an unknown number. A cold shiver ran down her spine as she clicked it open. "We know what you overheard. Don't try to warn him again. This is your only warning." Samantha's blood ran cold. The text wasn't a threat. It was a promise. She threw her phone down on the couch, her hands trembling. How had they found her so quickly? What were they going to do? She didn't even know who they were, but they clearly had eyes everywhere. Samantha's mind raced. She couldn't back down now, not after everything. She had already taken the first step by warning Christopher. She couldn't turn back. But how could she be sure he would take her seriously now? She needed to find a way to make him listen, to make him understand that the danger was real and imminent. If she didn't, the consequences could be fatal. She decided to try again. But this time, she would be more careful. This time, she would make sure that someone else was there to witness the conversation. Maybe then, he'd be forced to believe her. The next morning, just as the sun began to rise, Samantha received a call from the front desk. Christopher Grant had requested to see her in the hotel's lobby. Her heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment she'd been waiting for. She didn't have much time to prepare, but she knew she couldn't hesitate. She had to act now. With shaky hands, she tied her apron and made her way to the lobby. The moment she stepped inside, her gaze immediately found him. Christopher stood tall, dressed impeccably, surrounded by his usual entourage. He was just as she remembered, sharp, commanding, and completely out of place in her world. But today, there was a difference. He wasn't surrounded by his usual business partners or assistants. It was just the two of them. Samantha took a deep breath as she walked toward him, keeping her eyes focused on his. Her heart pounded in her chest. This was her chance. This time, she wouldn't back down. "Mr. Grant," she called out, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. He turned, his eyes narrowing as he recognized her. "I need to talk to you," Samantha continued, trying to steady her breath. "About your trip. You have to cancel it. There's no other way." She didn't know where the words were coming from, but she spoke them with conviction, as though everything she had been through had led to this moment. Christopher glanced at her for a moment, his expression unreadable. For a long second, there was nothing but silence. Then, he raised an eyebrow. "Why should I trust you?" he asked, his voice calm but skeptical. "I can't explain everything," she replied, her voice shaking slightly. "But I've heard things that I know you need to know. Your life is in danger. Your wife, she's planning something." Samantha could hardly believe the words were coming out of her mouth. It was risky, it was dangerous, but it was the truth. Christopher looked at her, his eyes narrowing as if searching for any signs of deceit. She held his gaze, refusing to back down. This was her only shot. "I'm serious, Mr. Grant. You have to trust me on this." For a long time, Christopher said nothing. The bustling sounds of the hotel lobby seemed to fade away as the weight of the conversation hung in the air. Finally, he spoke. "I'll think about it," he said, his voice flat and uninterested. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving Samantha standing there, feeling as if her world had just collapsed around her. She stood frozen for a moment, her mind reeling. He hadn't believed her. He hadn't taken her seriously. Had she risked everything for nothing? Her stomach twisted with a mix of anger and fear. She had done everything she could, but in the end, it wasn't enough. It was over before it had even begun. But deep down, she knew it wasn't. There had to be another way. She couldn't just let it go. Not after hearing those words. Not after knowing the truth. Samantha walked back to her small apartment that evening, her thoughts heavy with doubt and fear. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had failed, but she also couldn't ignore the small, stubborn flicker of hope that remained. She had warned him. She had done everything she could to make him understand. Now it was up to him to decide what to do next, and she could only wait to see if it was enough to save his life. Samantha's thoughts swirled in her mind as the days passed by. She had done everything she could to warn Christopher, but now the weight of what she had overheard seemed to close in on her like a suffocating fog. She couldn't shake the images of Elizabeth's venomous words and the chilling promises made by the man on the other end of the conversation. And the silence from Christopher, since their meeting, only added to her anxiety. Had he even considered what she said? Or was she just another invisible maid who could be easily dismissed? For a while, it seemed like life had returned to normal. The steady hum of the hotel, the endless parade of guests checking in and out, the routine of cleaning the lavish rooms. It all felt like a familiar rhythm, an escape from the chaos that lingered in the back of her mind. But no matter how hard she tried to focus on her work, the tension gnawed at her. She couldn't stop thinking about the danger Christopher was in and the nagging fear that she had done too little, too late. Then, one afternoon, as Samantha was cleaning one of the penthouse suites, she heard something that made her blood run cold. It wasn't the usual chatter of guests or the faint hum of hotel staff. It was the unmistakable sound of a phone call. A conversation, one she wasn't supposed to overhear. She stopped in her tracks, frozen with the rag in her hand. The voice on the other end of the phone was familiar, Christopher's. But there was something in his tone that made her heart skip a beat. It wasn't the usual confidence and charisma that she had come to expect from him. This was different. His voice was tinged with anxiety, frustration, and something far more dangerous, fear. "I don't care what you say," he was saying, his words sharp and urgent. "I know what I heard, and I'm not going to let you get away with it. I've got enough on you to bring this whole thing down. The trip is canceled, and I'll make sure you regret this." Samantha's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. She didn't move, didn't even dare to blink. She wasn't sure what she had just heard, but one thing was clear. Christopher had somehow found out about the plot. The truth was beginning to unravel. He was still talking, his voice filled with determination. "You think I'm just going to let this go? Think again. I'll expose everything, every last detail, and I will make sure you pay for what you've done." Samantha's heart raced. She couldn't believe it. After everything, after all the doubt and uncertainty, Christopher had finally taken action. He had figured it out. He knew the truth. As the conversation ended, Samantha let out a breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. She had to act. This was the moment she had been waiting for. But there was no time to waste. She quickly gathered her things, her mind racing with questions. What would Christopher do next? Could he handle what was coming? And most importantly, what would she do now? Later that evening, after her shift ended, Samantha received a call from an unfamiliar number. She hesitated for a moment before answering, a sinking feeling in her stomach. It was Christopher's assistant, requesting her presence at the hotel once more. It seemed like he wanted to meet her again. This time, however, Samantha wasn't sure if it was a meeting for gratitude or something far more dangerous. As she entered the lobby of the Regent Tower, her pulse quickened. She spotted Christopher almost immediately, his usual entourage nowhere to be found. He stood alone, his face tense and serious. His eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time, she saw something different in him. Something vulnerable. "Miss Matthews," he greeted her, his voice low but steady. "I know what you said to me, and I've been doing some digging. It's worse than I thought. I've canceled the trip, but there's more to this than just the murder plot." Samantha's heart skipped a beat as she took a step closer. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Christopher looked around, ensuring no one else was paying attention, before continuing. "I've discovered something about Elizabeth, about her family. There's a web of lies, corruption, and power that stretches far beyond what you and I ever imagined. My wife, she's involved in something much bigger than I thought. It's not just about the trip or the murder anymore. It's about control, money, and power." Samantha's stomach twisted. She had always suspected that something was off, but hearing it from Christopher's lips made the whole situation more real, more terrifying. "And now," he continued, his eyes darkening, "I need your help. You're the only one who knows the full extent of what's going on. I don't know who to trust anymore, but I know I can't do this alone." Samantha's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just about warning him anymore. This was bigger than either of them. The stakes had been raised, and now she was caught in the middle of something she had never signed up for. But there was no turning back. She had already stepped into this world, and now it was time to face it head on. "I'll help you," she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of fear and uncertainty spinning in her chest. "But we have to be careful. I don't know what Elizabeth and her family are capable of. They'll stop at nothing to protect their secrets." Christopher nodded, a grim expression on his face. "I know, but we don't have a choice anymore. We have to stop them before it's too late." With that, they both knew their journey into the dark heart of the conspiracy had just begun. The road ahead would be dangerous, and they would have to rely on each other to uncover the truth and, ultimately, bring down the people who had caused so much pain and destruction. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly coming together, but there was still so much left to uncover. For Samantha, there was no turning back now. She was in this fight for justice, for Christopher, for herself, and for everyone who had been caught in the crossfire of greed and corruption. The real battle was only just beginning. The next few days were a blur of tension and uncertainty. Samantha couldn't shake the feeling that her life had taken a turn from which there was no returning. She had crossed a line, stepping into a world of deceit, betrayal, and violence that she had never imagined. But now there was no going back. Christopher was depending on her, and somehow, she knew she couldn't let him down. Not after everything they had discovered. Her every move felt scrutinized, like there were eyes watching her, even when she was alone. At night, her apartment felt too quiet, the silence pressing in on her. Every creak of the floorboards, every passing car outside, made her heart race. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were out there, somewhere, waiting to silence her. But she couldn't stop now. She had to see this through. Christopher had called her the previous evening, asking her to meet him at a private location. He was becoming more desperate, more determined with each passing day. He had learned more about Elizabeth's family, about their connections, and the dangerous depths of their operations. But there was one thing that Christopher couldn't uncover alone. He needed her help. "Meet me tomorrow," he had said over the phone, his voice tense. "There's something I need to show you. Something that might change everything." Samantha barely slept that night, her mind racing with questions. What was it that Christopher had discovered? What did he want to show her? She couldn't afford to waste any more time. She had already made her decision to stand by him, and now she had to be ready for whatever came next. The following day, she found herself standing outside a small cafe in a quiet corner of the city, far from the hotel and the high-profile world they were both caught in. Christopher was waiting for her at a corner table, looking more like a man caught in a storm than the confident businessman she had first seen. As she sat down across from him, he wasted no time in diving straight into the conversation. "I've been following the money," he said, his voice low but urgent. "I've gone through financial records, connected some dots, and what I've found, it's worse than I ever imagined. Elizabeth's family isn't just involved in corporate corruption. They've been laundering money for years. And they're doing it through a series of front companies all across the city. It's massive, Samantha." Samantha's stomach churned. She had always known there was something off about Elizabeth's family. But to hear the full scope of it, to understand the magnitude of their operations, made her feel like she had just stepped into a nightmare. "But it doesn't stop there," Christopher continued, his hands trembling slightly. "I've found evidence that they've been using their influence to control politicians, to manipulate laws, and they've been involved in some very questionable activities. Illegal, dangerous things that I can't even begin to explain. The more I dig, the deeper it goes. It's like an endless web of lies and betrayal. And they've been covering their tracks for years. No one has even come close to exposing them." Samantha listened intently, her heart pounding in her chest. She had a feeling they were getting closer to something big, something that could bring everything crashing down. But with each step they took toward the truth, the more dangerous it became. "So what do we do now?" she asked, her voice steady despite the growing fear in her chest. "How do we stop them?" Christopher leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. "We need to gather more evidence. We need something concrete, something they can't deny. If we can get our hands on their financial records, direct proof of their involvement in the illegal activities, then we can expose them for good." Samantha's mind raced. She had no idea how they were going to get the documents they needed. The people involved in this operation were powerful, dangerous. If they were caught, there was no telling what would happen to them. "I don't know if we can do this," Samantha said, her voice wavering slightly. "This is bigger than we are, Christopher. We're just two people against a whole system of corruption. What if we fail?" Christopher's eyes softened, and he placed a hand on hers across the table. "We won't fail," he said firmly. "We've come this far, and we can't stop now. We're in this together, Samantha, and together we can bring them down. We just have to be smart about it." His words gave her a sense of comfort, but the fear in her chest didn't go away. The stakes were higher than ever, and every step they took brought them closer to a confrontation that could destroy everything they had worked for. "You're right," Samantha said after a long pause. "We can't back down now. But how do we get the evidence? How do we even begin to get into their financial records?" Christopher's eyes gleamed with determination. "I know someone who can help. A former associate of mine. He has access to a lot of the records I need. But it's risky. We'll need to meet him, and we'll have to do it without anyone knowing. If Elizabeth's people find out, we'll be dead before we can do anything." Samantha's heart skipped a beat. She had no idea who Christopher's associate was or how they would get the documents, but she knew one thing. This was the next step. This was their chance to make a real difference. "We'll do it," she said, her voice filled with resolve. "We'll get the evidence. We have to. For everything we've uncovered so far, we can't let them get away with this." Christopher nodded, his jaw set in determination. "Good. We'll move fast. The more time we waste, the more dangerous it gets. We'll meet tomorrow night, and we'll get the documents we need. We're getting closer, Samantha. We just have to keep pushing." As they finished their conversation, Samantha felt the weight of the task ahead settling on her shoulders. It wasn't just about Christopher's life anymore. It was about the truth, about justice, and about finally taking down the people who had been pulling the strings for far too long. The road ahead was uncertain, and the risks were enormous. But for the first time since this whole nightmare had begun, Samantha felt a flicker of hope. They were close, so close to exposing the truth, and she wasn't about to let anything stand in their way. The night was cold and the city lights shimmered beneath the sky as Samantha and Christopher stood outside the rundown warehouse on the outskirts of town. The tension between them was palpable, the air thick with anticipation and fear. Tonight, they were about to take a dangerous step. Tonight, they were going to meet Christopher's former associate, the man who could provide them with the documents that would bring Elizabeth's family down. As they approached the warehouse, Samantha couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding settle over her. The building, tucked away in an industrial part of the city, looked abandoned. Dark windows, cracked brick walls, and a sense of neglect that made her feel like they were walking straight into a trap. Her heart beat in her chest, each step feeling heavier than the last. This was it, the moment where they would either gain the upper hand or be swallowed by the very darkness they were trying to expose. "You sure about this?" Samantha asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Christopher gave her a tight, reassuring smile. "It's our best shot. He's the only one who has access to the records we need. He was once a part of their operation, and he knows how they work. If anyone can help us, it's him." Samantha nodded, though the unease in her stomach refused to dissipate. "Let's just get this over with." They stepped into the dimly lit warehouse, the sounds of their footsteps echoing in the empty space. The warehouse smelled of dust and decay, an ominous sign of its abandonment. Christopher led the way, his stride purposeful and confident, but Samantha could sense the tension in him, too. He was as nervous as she was, maybe more so. This wasn't just about exposing a family of criminals anymore. This was about their lives. The stakes were higher than ever, and if anything went wrong, they wouldn't make it out of this alive. They reached the back of the warehouse, where a small office had been set up. The door was ajar, and the dim light inside cast long shadows against the walls. Christopher knocked once before pushing the door open. Inside, a man sat at a desk, his back to them. He looked up as they entered, his face illuminated by the pale glow of a desk lamp. "Christopher," the man said in a low, gravelly voice. "I didn't think you'd actually come." The man's name was Jack Dalton, a former business associate of Christopher's, and someone with a reputation that made even the toughest people in the city nervous. Jack had once been part of the underground financial operations that Elizabeth's family had used to launder money. But now, he was on the run, distancing himself from the criminal empire he had once helped build. Samantha couldn't help but feel a chill run down her spine as Jack's eyes scanned them. He was dangerous, and, if they weren't careful, he could be just as much of a threat as the people they were trying to expose. "We don't have much time," Christopher said, stepping forward and placing a briefcase on the desk. We need the documents. All of them. The records you have on Elizabeth's family. Everything. Jack raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into a smirk. You know it's not that simple, don't you? Information like that doesn't come cheap. It's dangerous, and you're asking me to stick my neck out again. You think I'm going to just hand over the keys to the kingdom? Samantha's stomach tightened, but she stayed silent, letting Christopher do the talking. She had no idea what kind of deal they had struck with Jack, but she knew they didn't have the luxury of time to negotiate. We don't have a choice, Jack, Christopher replied, his voice steady but firm. I'm not asking you to risk your life for nothing. I'm offering you a chance to walk away from all of this, to make things right. This is your opportunity to be on the winning side for once. Jack leaned back in his chair, studying Christopher for a long moment. His expression was unreadable, and Samantha couldn't tell if he was weighing his options or simply enjoying the power he held over them. Finally, Jack stood up, moving slowly toward a filing cabinet in the corner of the room. You think you're the first person to try and take down Elizabeth and her family? People have tried for years. Hell, I've tried. But the thing about them is they don't just let go of what they have. They'll do whatever it takes to hold on to their power. You're asking for a fight, and you're asking the wrong guy for help. Christopher's eyes narrowed, but he didn't back down. You've got something we need, Jack. I don't care what it takes. You owe me this. You owe me all of us this. Jack's expression softened slightly, but there was no warmth in it. Fine, he said, reaching into the cabinet. But don't say I didn't warn you. He pulled out a stack of documents and slid them across the desk toward Christopher. Samantha's breath caught in her throat as she saw the pile. These were the records they needed, everything. Names, dates, accounts. It was all there. The key to bringing Elizabeth and her family to justice was in her hands. But Samantha couldn't shake the feeling that getting this information had only just set them on a darker path. Christopher quickly grabbed the documents and stuffed them into the briefcase. We'll make sure it's all worth your while, he said, turning toward the door. But as he reached for the handle, Jack's voice stopped him. One last thing, Jack said, his voice low. You think you're the only ones going after them? You think you're the only ones who know about these documents? You'd better watch your backs, because Elizabeth's got eyes everywhere. And she won't stop until she takes you down. Samantha's heart skipped a beat. They were already too deep. There was no going back now. Christopher turned to face Jack, his expression cold. We'll take our chances. And with that, they walked out of the warehouse, the heavy weight of the documents in Christopher's hand and the weight of their dangerous future ahead. As they stepped into the night, Samantha couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking straight into a trap. The shadows seemed to follow them as they made their way back to the car, and the quiet hum of the city around them felt more ominous than ever. They had what they needed, but now the real battle was about to begin. The fight for the truth was only just starting, and Samantha knew it was going to cost them more than they ever imagined. The moment Samantha and Christopher stepped out of the warehouse, the night air hit them like a cold slap to the face. The tension that had been building over the past few days now weighed heavily on their shoulders. They had the documents. They had what they needed to take down Elizabeth's family and expose their criminal empire. But as they walked toward the car, a nagging feeling settled in Samantha's chest, a feeling that they were being watched. Every shadow seemed darker, every sound sharper. They had made it this far, but the path ahead was anything but certain. The drive back to the city felt endless. The streets passed by in a blur of headlights and streetlights, but Samantha couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Every corner they turned, every alleyway they passed, felt like it could be hiding a threat. They had made an enemy of some of the most powerful people in the city, and there was no telling what lengths Elizabeth's family would go to in order to protect their secrets. Christopher sat beside her, his expression grim, his fingers gripping the briefcase tightly. He hadn't said much since they left the warehouse, and Samantha could tell he was thinking about the same thing she was. The documents in that briefcase could be their salvation or their undoing. As they reached Christopher's apartment, Samantha glanced over at him. "What now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We have the evidence. But Elizabeth's family, they won't just let this go. They'll come after us. They'll come after you." Christopher sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know, but we don't have much choice. If we don't do this now, we'll be giving them a free pass to continue with whatever they've been doing. The longer we wait, the more dangerous it gets. He was right, of course. They couldn't back down now. They had come too far. But as they entered the apartment, Samantha couldn't shake the feeling that they were racing against time. The danger was closing in, and they didn't know who to trust anymore. Jack had warned them about Elizabeth's family, about how they had eyes everywhere, and how they wouldn't hesitate to take them down. "We need to get these to the authorities," Christopher said, his voice firm. "The police are our best shot. They have the resources we don't. They can protect us." Samantha nodded, though she still felt uneasy. "And what if they don't believe us? What if they're already in their pocket?" Christopher paused, his gaze hardening. "We'll find someone we can trust. We have to. We can't let fear stop us." That night, they sat together at Christopher's apartment, reviewing the documents. They carefully went through the pages, noting down every detail, every name, every transaction. It was all there. The evidence they needed to expose Elizabeth's family for the criminals they were. But with each page they turned, the gravity of their situation became more apparent. They weren't just uncovering financial fraud or illegal business deals. They were uncovering a vast web of corruption that reached into every corner of the city. And they were about to tear it all down. But even as they made their plans, the fear gnawed at Samantha. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something she couldn't see, but could feel deep in her bones. She had learned enough about Elizabeth's family to know that they didn't lose gracefully, and they wouldn't go down without a fight. Suddenly, the sharp ring of Christopher's phone cut through the silence. He answered quickly, his voice low and controlled. "Samantha," he said after a moment, his tone shifting, "we need to go. Now." Samantha's heart skipped a beat. She stood up, grabbing her bag, her mind racing with 1,000 questions. "What's going on?" "There's no time to explain," Christopher said urgently. "But someone found out. Elizabeth's people, they know about the documents. We have to get out of here before they make a move." The realization hit Samantha like a punch to the gut. They had been discovered. Elizabeth's family wasn't going to wait to strike. They were already on their heels. Without another word, Christopher grabbed the briefcase and headed for the door. Samantha followed closely behind, her mind racing with the terrifying thought of what might come next. They had to move quickly. The longer they stayed, the greater the risk. As they exited the building and made their way to the car, the tension in the air was almost suffocating. Christopher's hand tightened on the wheel as he sped through the streets, taking sharp turns and avoiding the main roads. They couldn't afford to be seen. Not now. Samantha sat in the passenger seat, her mind reeling. They were in this fight now. There was no turning back. The stakes were higher than ever. They had the evidence, but so did Elizabeth's family. Whoever got to it first would have the power to control the narrative. They couldn't let that happen. Christopher's voice broke through her thoughts. "We're heading to a safe house. I know a place where we can lay low for a while." "It's not far." Samantha nodded, though her mind was elsewhere. She had no idea who they could trust anymore. The people they were fighting against were everywhere. They had to stay one step ahead, but they didn't know how much longer they could keep running. The drive felt like it took forever, the streets growing darker and more desolate the further they went. Eventually, they arrived at a small, unmarked building on the edge of the city. It was tucked away behind a row of warehouses, far from the chaos of a downtown area. Christopher parked the car in an alleyway, keeping the engine running as they both got out. "This is it," he said, looking around cautiously. "Stay close, and don't make a sound." They entered the building through the back door, which creaked on its hinges. Inside, the room was dimly lit, filled with old furniture and boxes. It was nothing glamorous, but it would serve its purpose. Christopher led her to a small room the back of the building and locked the door behind them. They would wait here until they figured out their next move. Samantha stood by the window, her mind racing. She had come this far, and now they were hiding like criminals. But this was the only way. They couldn't trust anyone else, not after everything that had happened. Christopher set the briefcase on a nearby table and looked at her. "We have to move quickly." They'll be coming for us. And when they do, we need to be ready. Samantha's heart was heavy, but her resolve had never been clearer. She couldn't back down. They couldn't afford to fail now. As they sat in silence, waiting for the next move, one thing became clear to Samantha. The storm was coming, and they had no choice but to face it head on. The real fight for their lives, and for the truth, was about to begin. The hours in the safe house passed like days, each minute heavier than the last. Samantha sat on the worn couch, her fingers drumming nervously on the armrest, eyes flickering toward the door. Every sound from the outside world, the occasional car passing, the rustling of leaves in the wind, made her tense, wondering if someone was coming for them. The fear that had been lurking in the back of her mind since they discovered Elizabeth's family was onto them had now settled firmly in her chest. They were on borrowed time. Christopher was pacing, his movements sharp and urgent as he checked his phone for any updates. The briefcase sat unopened on the table between them, a constant reminder of everything they had at stake. Samantha could tell that Christopher was doing his best to keep his composure, but the stress was visible on his face. He was as scared as she was, maybe even more so. "I don't like this," he muttered, wiping a hand over his face. "We're too exposed here. They'll be looking for us by now. They won't stop until they have everything back." Samantha's heart sank at his words. She hadn't wanted to admit it, but he was right. Elizabeth's family wouldn't hesitate to come after them. They had already proven how far they were willing to go to protect their empire. The documents they had were their only leverage, and if they lost them, it would all be over. "We need to get these documents to the authorities," Samantha said, her voice firm despite the unease crawling up her spine. "If we can get the police on our side, we can finish this once and for all. We can expose them for good." Christopher shook his head, frustration creeping into his expression. "It's not that simple. I don't trust the police. Not with this. Elizabeth has too many people on the inside. She's got connections everywhere. If we go to them, they could turn on us just as easily." Samantha's stomach churned. She knew he was right. They couldn't trust anyone, at least not yet. But without help, they were stuck. They couldn't take down a criminal empire alone. As Christopher continued to pace, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at it before pulling it out, his expression darkening. "It's him," he said, his voice tight. "Jack. He's found something. He says it's urgent." Samantha's pulse quickened. "What did he find?" Christopher looked at her, his gaze intense. "I don't know, but he wants to meet. He says it could change everything." Samantha's mind raced. What could Jack possibly have uncovered that would change their situation? Was it more evidence? Or was it a trap? "We need to go to him," Christopher said, already reaching for the briefcase. "We have no choice. If Jack has what we need, we can't risk waiting. We'll have to make sure we stay ahead of Elizabeth's people." Samantha stood up, grabbing her bag. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion and fear. They were already playing a dangerous game, and now it seemed like things were about to get even more complicated. Christopher quickly locked the door behind them, and they made their way out of the safe house, moving quickly and quietly through the alley. They didn't have much time. Every second they spent exposed brought them closer to being found. Samantha's heart pounded as she followed Christopher down the street, trying to stay in the shadows. The car ride to the meeting point felt like it took an eternity. The city outside the windows blurred by the speed at which they were driving. Samantha's eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror, expecting to see a black SUV or some other vehicle tailing them. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Finally, they arrived at an old, nondescript building in a quiet part of the city, far from the busy downtown area. The building was an abandoned office complex, dark and seemingly lifeless. There were no signs of life, no indication of what lay inside. Christopher parked the car a few blocks away, motioning for Samantha to follow him. As they walked toward the building, he pulled a gun from his jacket, a precaution he hadn't needed before but was now clearly essential. Samantha's stomach tightened. She wasn't used to this kind of danger, but she was learning fast. They were in too deep now. Inside the building, the atmosphere was heavy with tension. Jack was waiting for them in a small, dimly lit room on the top floor. He sat at a desk, flipping through a folder of documents. His eyes met theirs as they entered, his face unreadable. "You came?" Jack said, his voice flat. "I didn't think you'd actually show up." Christopher didn't waste time with pleasantries. "What did you find?" Jack didn't answer immediately. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a manila envelope, handing it over to Christopher. "I dug deeper. You were right to question Elizabeth's family, but there's more to it. You're not just dealing with a money laundering scheme. There's a whole network of blackmail, bribery, and something far darker. I've found evidence that they're involved in more than just corporate fraud. They've been buying influence, controlling people, and manipulating situations to their advantage for years." Samantha's stomach dropped. She had suspected something like this, but hearing it out loud made it feel all too real. The documents in the envelope could be their ticket to exposing everything, if they were still alive to use them. Jack continued, his tone cold. "And it's not just Elizabeth. Her father, he's been the mastermind behind all of this. But they've all been covering their tracks so well, it's like trying to find a needle in a haystack. I've got something here that can help. But it's risky." Christopher's eyes narrowed as he opened the envelope, pulling out a stack of papers. Samantha leaned over his shoulder to look, and her breath caught in her throat. The evidence was damning. Names, dates, records of transactions, everything they needed to take down the entire operation. "This is it," Christopher said, his voice steady but laced with a hint of disbelief. "This is what we've been looking for." Jack nodded, but there was no triumph in his expression, only the grim reality of what was at stake. "Take it, but be careful. The people you're dealing with don't just kill their enemies, they erase them. If they find out you have this, you'll both be dead before you can even get to the cops." Samantha shivered at Jack's words. She had heard the threats before, but now it was real. The stakes had never been higher. Christopher stood up, putting the documents back into the briefcase. "We'll be careful," he said, "and we'll finish this. I promise you that." Jack gave him a final, wary glance. "I hope you know what you're doing," he said, "because once you step into this, there's no turning back." As they left the building, Samantha's mind was spinning. They had the documents, but now the real fight was beginning. They had to be smarter, faster, and more dangerous than the people they were up against. And the clock was ticking. With each step, the noose around them tightened. There was no turning back now. They were all in. The silence that settled between Samantha and Christopher as they left the building felt suffocating. The night air was crisp, and the city streets stretched out before them like a maze they could no longer navigate with ease. Every shadow seemed deeper, every echo from the distant traffic like a warning. They had the documents, proof of everything, but now they had to make a choice. Where would they go? Who could they trust? Christopher didn't hesitate. His jaw was set in determination, his gaze focused on the road ahead. He wasn't the same man who had walked into the safe house days earlier. Now, with the documents in hand, he looked like someone who had made peace with the danger surrounding him. Samantha, on the other hand, could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on her with every step they took. "Are you sure about this?" Samantha asked quietly as they made their way back to the car, the darkened streets offering no comfort. "We could go to the police, someone who isn't connected to Elizabeth's family." Christopher shook his head, his expression hard. "I've already told you why we can't trust the authorities. We need to take this directly to the media. Public exposure is the only way we can make sure they don't cover it up. It's risky, but it's the only shot we have left." Samantha's mind raced. They were talking about going public, about releasing the information to the media where the whole world could see it. It would be their final, desperate attempt to stop Elizabeth and her family. It was a dangerous move, one that would put both of them in the crosshairs, but Christopher was right. They didn't have the luxury of playing it safe anymore. This wasn't about just survival. It was about taking down a criminal empire. "We can't go to anyone we know," Christopher continued. "They have too many eyes. We have to find someone outside their reach. I know a journalist, a friend of mine from years ago. She's always been willing to go after the big stories. If anyone can make sure this sees the light of day, it's her." Samantha nodded, her heart hammering in her chest. This was it. They were putting all their chips on the table. No more running. No more hiding. They arrived at the small apartment Christopher kept in the city, a place he used when he needed to be out of the spotlight. It wasn't much, but it was safe for now. Christopher made a quick call, and within minutes, they were on their way to meet his contact. The streets grew quieter the further they went from the city center. The places they passed were unfamiliar, the neighborhood growing more industrial, less populated. They pulled up to a building with a faded sign above the door, the Verity Press, a small, independent newsroom, a place that was used to going against the grain. Inside, they were greeted by Julia Rivers, a sharp-eyed journalist with short blonde hair and an easy smile that never quite reached her eyes. She was a woman used to playing the long game, one who wasn't afraid to push boundaries and dig into stories that others would shy away from. But Samantha could see the wariness in her eyes as soon as Christopher introduced her. "I didn't expect to see you again," Julia said, crossing her arms as she leaned against the wall. "The last time we spoke, I didn't exactly leave you on good terms." "I know," Christopher replied, his voice steady. "But this is different. We need your help, Julia. We got something big, something that could bring down a lot of people." Julia raised an eyebrow. "What kind of something big are we talking about?" Christopher didn't waste time. He opened the briefcase, pulling out the stack of documents. This, evidence of corruption, blackmail, fraud, everything you could imagine. It's all there. And Elizabeth Grant's family is at the center of it. They've been controlling the city, manipulating the system for years. If we don't expose them now, they'll keep doing it. Julia took a step forward, her curiosity piqued. She flipped through the documents quickly, her expression turning from skepticism to something darker. This is huge. You're sure about this?" Christopher nodded. "I'm sure. Every piece of it checks out." Julia put the papers down and looked at them both, her expression serious. "You realize what you're asking, right? Exposing this will ruin their entire operation, but it will also put a target on your backs the size of this city. It won't go down easily. We're ready for that," Christopher said, his voice unyielding. "We don't have a choice. They'll stop at nothing to keep this from getting out." Julia stared at them both for a moment, weighing the risks. Samantha could see the wheels turning in her head. It wasn't just a story to her. It was a chance to change everything. But it was also a line she couldn't uncross once she stepped over it. Finally, Julia nodded. "All right, I'll take it. I'll get this to the right people. It'll be out there, and they won't be able to hide anymore. But you're going to need protection. I can't promise you'll be safe after this." Samantha felt the air shift in the room. They had crossed the point of no return. They were on the brink of exposing the biggest scandal the city had ever seen. And now, they had to brace themselves for the storm that was about to hit. As they left the building, the weight of the situation settled in. The plan was in motion. There was no turning back. "We've done everything we can," Christopher said quietly as they walked back to the car. "Now we wait. But we need to be ready. Elizabeth's family won't take this lying down." Samantha nodded, but inside, she felt the rush of fear and adrenaline. This was it, the endgame. And yet, in the back of her mind, there was a nagging feeling, a sense that the danger was far from over. They were stepping into the lion's den, and who knew what awaited them there. As they drove back to the safe house, Samantha looked out the window, trying to calm the storm in her chest. The streets were still dark, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was following them. Every turn felt like it might be their last. The real fight was just beginning, and no one, not even the two of them, knew how it would end. The next few days crawled by in an agonizing blur of waiting. The truth about Elizabeth's family, their corruption, their manipulation, their brutal control over the city, was out. It was in the hands of Julia, who was working tirelessly to get the story to the right people. Samantha could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her, each passing minute making the air feel heavier, more suffocating. The danger they faced was growing by the hour, and yet they were powerless to stop the inevitable. Every time Samantha checked her phone, her pulse quickened. Would it be a call from Julia? A news outlet willing to pick up the story? Or was it the call they both feared? The one that would come from Elizabeth's family, telling them to stop or face the consequences. Christopher was on edge, too. His usual calm demeanor was replaced with an almost palpable tension, as if he were constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. They both knew the risk. They had exposed something massive, something that would change the power dynamic in the city forever. And people like Elizabeth Grant didn't give up their power easily. The stakes had never been higher. One evening, as Samantha sat in the dimly lit living room of the safe house, her eyes glued to the window, she heard Christopher's footsteps behind her. He was carrying a stack of papers, his brow furrowed in thought. He sat beside her, not saying a word for a few moments, before finally breaking the silence. "It's only a matter of time now," he said, his voice grim. "Julia's making progress. She's getting the right people involved. But Elizabeth's family, they're already circling. I can feel it." Samantha nodded, her heart racing. She had heard the rumors, the whispers about how powerful Elizabeth's family really was. They had friends in high places, connections that went beyond just business. If they were going to survive this, they needed to stay one step ahead. They needed to act fast. "What if they come for us before it's all out?" Samantha asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if we're too late?" Christopher exhaled deeply, looking at the stack of papers in his hands. "We've already crossed that line, Sam. There's no going back now. We just have to make sure they don't have a chance to bury this." Suddenly, Christopher's phone buzzed, cutting through the heavy silence. His eyes flicked down at the screen, and his face immediately paled. Samantha's stomach dropped as she saw the look on his face. "Who is it?" she asked, her voice trembling with unease. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he swiped to answer the call, his hand shaking slightly as he put it to his ear. "It's Julia," he said quietly, before nodding as he listened intently. Samantha's mind raced. What was she going to say? Had the story finally been picked up? Or had things taken a turn for the worse? Christopher's expression shifted from unease to disbelief, and Samantha's heart began to pound. He glanced at her, his eyes wide with shock. "They found us," he said, his voice tight. "Elizabeth's people, they're closing in. They know exactly where we are." Samantha's blood ran cold. The feeling she had in her gut, the one she had tried to ignore, had been right. They were no longer safe. Elizabeth's family had already figured out their next move, and they were about to strike. Christopher was already standing, moving quickly toward the door. "We need to go. Now." Samantha jumped to her feet, panic surging through her body. "But what about the documents? We can't leave them behind." "I've got everything," Christopher replied, his tone sharp with urgency. "We're not going to give them a chance to take this away from us. Come on." They rushed out of the house, the world outside now feeling more dangerous than ever. The streets were dark, almost too quiet. Samantha's mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. How had they found them so quickly? Who had betrayed them? Christopher led the way, his movements quick and precise, as if he had done this many times before. They got into the car, and as he started the engine, the reality of their situation hit Samantha like a freight train. They had been exposed, and now they were in a race against time. "Where are we going?" Samantha asked, her voice shaky as she tried to calm her breathing. "To a different location. We need to get off the grid, at least until we can figure out what to do next." As they drove through the city, Samantha couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. She glanced nervously in the rearview mirror, but there was nothing behind them. Still, the nagging sense of danger wouldn't go away. They were being hunted. The city blurred by in the background as Christopher took sharp turns, moving faster and faster, trying to shake anyone who might be tailing them. Samantha's hands clenched tightly in her lap as she stared out the window, trying to keep her nerves under control. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they arrived at another building, this one even more hidden than the safe house. Christopher pulled into an underground garage, and they quickly made their way inside. The building was old and dark, tucked away in a part of the city that wasn't even on most maps. "This is a friend's place," Christopher said as they entered the building. "We'll be safe here for now." They ascended to an apartment on the top floor, and the door closed with a heavy thud behind them. Inside, it was quiet, almost too quiet. Samantha tried to catch her breath, but the tension in the air was unbearable. Christopher went to a small desk in the corner of the room and pulled out the briefcase. I don't know how much time we have, he said, but we need to make sure we're ready for whatever comes next. They won't stop until they've wiped us out. Samantha nodded, but her mind was racing. They were on the brink of losing everything. The documents, the evidence, the truth they had fought so hard to expose. It was all in jeopardy. And they weren't safe yet. There has to be another way, Samantha whispered, mostly to herself. We can't just keep running. We need to fight back. We need to finish this. Christopher looked at her, his eyes intense. You're right, but we need to be smart. The fight isn't over, but we've got one shot left. The words hung in the air as they stood there, facing the harsh reality of the battle they were about to fight. They had come too far to back down now, and it was time to finish what they had started. But the question lingered in Samantha's mind. Could they really bring down Elizabeth's family? Or would they be consumed by the very system they were trying to dismantle? The storm was coming, and they had no choice but to face it head on. The quiet hum of the apartment felt almost surreal compared to the storm that had been building in Samantha's mind since they arrived at their new hiding place. They had barely spoken since entering the building, both lost in their thoughts as they tried to process the sudden shift in their lives. The weight of the documents, everything they had worked for, still rested heavily between them. Christopher moved around the apartment, checking the locks on the windows and doors, making sure they were secure. Samantha's thoughts kept drifting back to the call from Julia. Had the story gone live yet? Was anyone else now aware of what they had uncovered? The fear of being found haunted her, but it wasn't the only thing gnawing at her. Do you think we're safe here? Samantha asked, her voice breaking the silence that had settled like a heavy fog. Christopher glanced over at her, his eyes hard with determination. For now, but we can't stay here long. We'll have to move again once things start heating up. Elizabeth's people don't stop. They'll be looking for us everywhere. Samantha swallowed, feeling the weight of his words. They had only bought themselves a little time. They had no idea how much longer they could keep running, how much longer they could hide. But running had become a part of their lives now. Always 2 steps ahead, always on the move, never knowing who to trust. She stood up and walked to the window, peering out at the dimly lit street below. The city felt like it was closing in around her, its towering buildings and crowded streets offering no escape. Every corner, every passerby felt like a potential threat. We've come so far, she said softly, her reflection staring back at her in the glass. And now it's all just a waiting game. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. Christopher's footsteps approached, and he stood beside her at the window. I know, but we're doing this for a reason, Sam. We're doing it for the truth. And we're doing it for people who have had no voice. We can't back down now, no matter how scared we are. Samantha turned to him, feeling the gravity of his words sink in. But what happens after this? What happens if we expose everything and they come for us? Christopher gave a faint, bitter smile. Then we fight. We don't just expose them, Sam. We take them down. This isn't just about exposing corruption. It's about stopping it for good. His words brought a sense of clarity she hadn't realized she needed. She had been so caught up in the fear and the uncertainty of the situation, but Christopher was right. They weren't just running. They weren't just hiding. They were fighting for something bigger than themselves. They were fighting for justice. We're not in this alone, she said with more conviction. We have the truth on our side. And with the evidence we have the power to change everything. Christopher nodded, his gaze steady. Exactly. We have everything we need. We just need to stay smart, stay ahead of them. But just as the words left his mouth, a sharp, insistent knock echoed from the door. Both of them froze, instinctively stepping away from the window. Samantha's heart raced in her chest as the silence stretched for a long, agonizing second. Another knock, this one louder, more demanding. Christopher moved toward the door, his expression now a mix of caution and determination. Stay back, he whispered to Samantha as he reached for the door handle. Samantha's breath hitched. She pressed herself against the wall, trying to steady herself. This was it, the moment they had feared. Whoever was on the other side of that door was here to find them. Elizabeth's people had caught up with them. Christopher opened the door slowly, his hand on the handle as he peered through the small crack, eyes narrowing. A shadowed figure stood outside, barely visible in the dim light. "Who is it?" Christopher asked, his voice low, but tinged with a warning. The figure stepped forward, and for a moment, Samantha's heart stopped. It wasn't one of Elizabeth's goons. It was Julia. Her sharp eyes met theirs, and there was no mistaking the urgency in her expression. "Get inside," she hissed, her voice barely audible but intense. "Now, they're coming for you." Samantha felt a chill run down her spine. The sense of dread she had been feeling since arriving at the safe house intensified. Julia's appearance, unexpected and unwelcome, could only mean one thing. The worst was about to unfold. Without a word, Christopher pulled the door open, and Julia rushed inside, closing it behind her quickly. She locked the door with a practiced motion, her eyes scanning the room as if expecting someone to be right behind her. "They know," Julia said, her voice tight with anxiety. "They know everything. The story's out. Somehow they got wind of it. They're already tracking every lead. You're not safe here anymore." Samantha felt a lump form in her throat. "How? How did they find out?" Julia's eyes flickered to the briefcase on the table. "I don't know, but they have eyes everywhere. I've been covering my tracks, but they're too powerful. They've got connections in the press, in law enforcement, everywhere. It's only a matter of time before they find you." Christopher clenched his fists, his jaw tight. "Then what do we do?" Julia didn't hesitate. "You leave. Now, I've arranged for a safe route, an underground network that will get you out of the city. You'll have to lay low for a while, but it's the only way you'll make it out alive." Samantha felt a surge of panic. "Leave?" Just like that, Julia stepped closer, her voice urgent. "If you don't, they'll find you. And if they find you, you won't survive. I don't know what's happening next, but I do know that if you stay here, you're as good as dead." Christopher turned to Samantha, his eyes searching hers. He didn't say anything, but the look in his eyes was enough. He knew they had no choice. They couldn't wait any longer. They had to move now. Without a word, Samantha grabbed the briefcase from the table. The documents, everything they had worked for, were still there. They couldn't leave them behind. They couldn't let Elizabeth's family take it all back. "Let's go," Christopher said, his voice low but resolute. "We're not stopping now. We've come too far." They moved quickly, gathering what little they had left, preparing to leave the safe house behind. As they stepped out into the cold night, Samantha's mind raced. The city that had once seemed so familiar now felt like a maze, full of traps and dead ends. The real battle was just beginning. They were running out of time, and there was no telling how long they could stay one step ahead. But they had no choice. This fight wasn't just for them anymore. It was for everyone who had been silenced by the power Elizabeth's family held. They had one shot, and they couldn't afford to miss. The air was thick with tension as Samantha and Christopher sped through the narrow back streets of the city, the headlights from the car casting long shadows on the pavement. They had just escaped the safe house, and now, with Julia's help, they were being ushered into an underground network that could get them out of the city. The walls of the car felt like they were closing in, and the once familiar streets now seemed unfamiliar, like a maze with no exit. Christopher drove with urgency, his eyes constantly scanning the rearview mirror. He knew they couldn't stay hidden forever. They were already being hunted, and if they didn't act fast, they would be caught in the web Elizabeth's family had spun. Julia sat in the back seat, her expression tense. She had been the one to bring them this far, guiding them through the chaos and keeping them one step ahead of Elizabeth's people. But even she knew that the game was reaching its climax. They had exposed the truth, and now they had to fight for their lives. The next few hours would determine everything. Samantha glanced at Christopher, who was focused on the road, his jaw clenched in concentration. She could see the weight of the situation in his eyes, the same fear, the same determination that mirrored her own. They had done the unthinkable. They had brought down a powerful family, a dangerous empire built on lies and deceit. But now the real challenge lay ahead, escaping it all alive. We're close, Julius said, breaking the silence. We'll be at the rendezvous point in 5 minutes. Once we're there, you'll have to go in alone. I've set up the exit route, but it's going to be tight. They'll be looking for you everywhere, and you can't afford to be caught. Christopher nodded, his grip tightening on the wheel. We'll make it. Samantha's heart was pounding. And what about you? What happens when we're gone? Julia's gaze softened for a moment, but she quickly masked it with resolve. I'll be fine. I've done my part. But this is the only way you'll make it out. Trust me, I'll be in touch when it's safe. As they pulled into the designated meeting point, an old warehouse tucked away in a desolate part of the city, a sense of finality settled over Samantha. The weight of everything they had gone through, the fear, the danger, the uncertainty, had all led to this moment. She looked at Christopher, meeting his eyes one last time. Promise me, she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. Promise me that we'll get through this. Christopher smiled faintly, a glimmer of warmth in his eyes. We will, he said, his voice full of conviction. We've already come this far. We're not stopping now. They exited the car, their movements quick and purposeful. The sound of their footsteps echoed through the empty warehouse, the cold, sterile air surrounding them as they made their way inside. The rendezvous point was a small, hidden office at the back of the warehouse. It was there that they would meet the contact who would ensure their escape from the city, a trusted ally who could help them disappear for good. As they approached the door, Christopher paused, turning to Samantha. Stay close, he said, his voice low. We don't know what's waiting for us in there. Samantha nodded, her nerves on edge. She was ready for whatever came next, but there was a part of her that couldn't shake the fear. They were about to face the final battle, and there was no way of knowing if they would make it out alive. They entered the office, and a figure stood waiting for them, a man in his mid-30s with sharp eyes and an air of authority. He glanced up as they walked in, and a brief moment of recognition passed between him and Christopher. You're late, the man said, his voice cold but not unfriendly. I've been expecting you. Christopher stepped forward, handing over the briefcase. We need to move now. No time to waste. The man nodded and quickly began to open a secure compartment in the wall, revealing a small stack of papers and a suitcase. Everything is set. I've got the papers you'll need, and the transport is ready. You'll be out of the country within the hour. Samantha's breath caught. This was it, the end of everything they had been through. They were about to vanish into the unknown, leaving behind the city, the danger, and the people who had been chasing them for so long. But just as they were about to turn and leave, a loud crash sounded from the entrance of the warehouse. The door slammed open, and a group of men stormed in, their guns drawn and their faces cold with fury. Elizabeth's family had found them. Move, Christopher shouted, pulling Samantha behind him as the gunfire erupted. They dove to the floor, narrowly avoiding the barrage of bullets that flew overhead. The air was thick with tension, the sound of the gunfire ringing in their ears. They needed a way out, and they needed it fast. Samantha's heart raced as they scrambled to their feet, making a break for the back exit. But the men were closing in, blocking every possible escape route. They were trapped. Get to the car, the contact shouted, his voice barely audible over the chaos. Go now, or you're not going anywhere. Without thinking, Christopher grabbed Samantha's hand and pulled her toward the back door. They ran, adrenaline pumping through their veins, each step feeling like it could be their last. Just as they reached the car, a bullet grazed Samantha's arm. She cried out, but Christopher didn't hesitate. He threw her into the passenger seat, slamming the door shut before jumping into the driver's seat. The engine roared to life, and they sped out of the warehouse, the sound of their pursuers' shouts fading behind them. The city blurred by as Christopher pushed the car to its limits, weaving through traffic and taking sharp turns. Samantha's heart was still racing, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. They had made it out. Barely. We're not done yet, Christopher said, his voice filled with resolve as he glanced at her. But we're closer than we've ever been. Samantha nodded, feeling a surge of hope. They had survived the worst. Now it was time to finish what they had started. They had exposed the truth, they had fought for it, and they had made it out alive. Elizabeth's family would face justice, and Samantha and Christopher would disappear into the world they had once known. This time, free from the shadows that had haunted them for so long. For the first time in weeks, Samantha allowed herself to breathe. They had won. The truth was finally out, and it had cost them everything. But in the end, they were free.